The wood grain on my desk had a crack running through it. Small, barely visible unless you knew exactly where to look. I'd noticed it 32 years ago, the week I moved into this office. Back then, the desk was secondhand. The carpet was stained, and the company had 11 employees and a dream that most people called foolish. I never fixed the crack. Some things you leave as they are. To remind yourself where you started, I was sitting at that same desk on a Thursday afternoon in late October, reading through the transfer documents my attorney had prepared, when my phone buzzed. I assumed it was my daughter-in-law confirming the dinner reservation. The celebration was set for Saturday, 2 days away. 40 years of building something from nothing, and I was finally ready to let go. I picked up the phone without thinking. The message was from a number I didn't recognize. No name. No greeting. Just 11 words. Before you sign anything, Saturday. Check Daniel's emails. All of them. I read it twice. Then I set the phone face down on the desk and sat very still for a long moment. Daniel is my son. My only son. He has my jaw and his mother's eyes and a laugh that fills whatever room he's in. He joined the company 14 years ago. Worked his way from project manager to COO. And I have never once doubted him. Not once in 32 years of watching that crack in my desk. Not once. I picked the phone back up and read the message a third time. Then I did something I am not proud of. I opened my laptop, pulled up the company's administrative backend, and logged into Daniel's email. I told myself I would close it the moment I found nothing. I told myself this would take 5 minutes, and I would feel foolish and relieved, and I would delete the anonymous message and never think about it again. I did not close it after 5 minutes. I was still reading 3 hours later, and by the time I finished, the office was dark, and my coffee had gone completely cold, and the transfer documents were still sitting on the corner of my desk. And I understood, in the quiet way that devastating things sometimes arrive, that Saturday was no longer a celebration. It was a trap. Let me tell you what I built. My father came to this country from Guadalajara with $40 and a trade. He did tile work bathrooms, kitchens, entryways. Beautiful, precise, patient work. He taught me that a floor is a foundation, that what people walk on every day tells you everything about how they live. I took that lesson and turned it into a commercial real estate development company. We started with one small office building in Phoenix in 1985. By the time Daniel joined us, we had projects in 11 states. Today, the portfolio sits at just under $900 million. I built it brick by brick, deal by deal. 18-hour days and weekends, and one very bad year in 2008, when I had to let go of people I loved and restructure everything from the ground up. My wife, Carol, sat with me through every crisis. She kept the books herself in the early years. She answered phones. She drove to job sites in the heat of an Arizona August to bring water to the crew, because she said, if they were going to work that hard for us, the least we could do was make sure they didn't pass out. Carol passed away 4 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. 6 weeks from diagnosis to the end. I still reach for the phone some mornings to call her. The company was always going to go to Daniel. We talked about it openly for years. I wanted a proper transition. Structured. Legal. Thoughtful. I hired a succession planning firm 18 months ago. I told Daniel everything. He sat across from me in this office and said, "Dad, I won't let you down." I believed him completely. What I found in his emails told a different story. The messages started 14 months ago, just weeks after we began the formal succession process. The other party in the conversation was a man named Garrett. I'll leave it at that. Garrett, it turned out, was a private equity contact Daniel had cultivated without my knowledge. The early emails were vague, exploratory. They were discussing what the portfolio might look like under new management. They talked about asset reallocation. They used phrases like deadweight properties and legacy sentimentality to describe projects I had spent decades on. I kept reading. By month 4 of the correspondence, the picture had sharpened considerably. Daniel and Garrett had drafted a preliminary agreement. Once the ownership transfer was complete, once I signed the documents sitting on my desk, Daniel would immediately bring in Garrett's firm as a strategic partner. Within 18 months, they planned to liquidate roughly 40% of the portfolio. The older properties, the ones with the lowest cap rates on paper, but the deepest roots in the communities where we'd worked for decades. Gone. Sold to a real estate investment trust that would raise 2 of them within the year. That was bad enough. Then I found the financial records. Daniel had shared documents with Garrett that were not supposed to leave the company. Proprietary valuations. Internal projections. A detailed breakdown of 3 properties I was quietly negotiating to acquire information that, in the wrong hands, could allow someone to move first and price me out entirely. He had shared all of it. In one email, Garrett wrote that the information was exactly what we needed. Daniel replied with a single word. Good. I sat back in my chair and looked at the crack in my desk for a long time. I did not call Daniel. I did not call my attorney. I did not call anyone that night. I went home, poured 2 fingers of bourbon, and sat on the back porch where Carol used to tend her garden. And I thought about every memory I had of my son, his Little League games, the summer he interned for us at 16 and complained about the heat, but showed up early every single day. The eulogy he gave at his mother's funeral that made grown men cry. I thought about all of it, and then I thought about what I was going to do next. The first thing I needed to know was who had sent me that text message. I called my IT director the next morning, Friday, and told him I needed to know where that number originated. He got back to me within 2 hours. The number was registered to a prepaid phone purchased in cash at a drugstore in Scottsdale. A dead end. Or so I thought. But then I remembered something. 3 weeks earlier, Daniel's assistant, a young woman named Rebecca, who had worked for him for 2 years, had asked to speak with me privately. I'd been rushed that day, distracted by a zoning issue on a project in Denver, and I'd told her we could talk next week. Next week came and went, and I forgot entirely. I called Rebecca that Friday morning and asked if she was available. She came to my office and closed the door and sat down and looked at her hands for a moment before she spoke. She told me she had seen emails she wasn't supposed to see, that she had tried to bring it to Daniel's attention, and he had told her she was misreading things, and that if she ever brought it up again, he would make her professional life very difficult. She had been scared. She hadn't known what to do. She'd bought a prepaid phone at a drugstore in Scottsdale. I want to be very careful about how I describe what I felt in that moment, because it was not a simple feeling. There was relief someone had tried to do the right thing, had taken a real risk to warn me. There was grief, because it meant the emails were real and not some misunderstanding I could explain away. There was something cold and focused settling into my chest. The same thing I feel when a deal goes sideways and I have to think clearly faster than I want to. I told Rebecca she had done the right thing. I told her her job was safe and that I would handle what came next. I asked her to keep our conversation between us until I said otherwise. She nodded and left. Then I called my attorney, not my corporate attorney, a different one I had used once before, years ago, for a matter I never discuss. I told him what I had found. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Don't sign anything Saturday, and don't let Daniel know you've seen the emails." He gave me very specific instructions for what to do next. I spent Friday afternoon and most of Friday evening following them precisely. The dinner was at a steakhouse. Daniel had chosen one of those places with leather booths and dim lighting and a wine list that comes in a binder. He'd reserved the private room, When I arrived, he was already there with his wife, my daughter-in-law, Sandra. She hugged me and said, I looked wonderful. Daniel poured me a glass of Cabernet and raised his own glass and said, to the next chapter. I raised my glass and smiled. I want to describe that dinner carefully because it was one of the strangest experiences of my life. I have negotiated deals across the table from people who were trying to deceive me. I have sat in rooms where someone was lying to my face, and I had to keep my expression neutral while I figured out my next move. But those were strangers. Or near strangers. This was my son, the person sitting across from me, cutting into his ribeye and talking about expansion plans and quarterly projections, was the boy I had coached in Little League, had taught to drive, had held at his mother's funeral. I ate my dinner. I asked questions about the business. I laughed at Daniel's jokes. Sandra told a story about their youngest daughter's school play, and I said all the right things. Inside, I was somewhere very far away. Near the end of the meal, Daniel slid a folder across the table. Attorney had a revised draft ready. He said, cleaned up a few of the technical sections. I thought you might want to look it over tonight. He'll be ready to sign first thing tomorrow. I took the folder. I thanked him. I told him I was proud of everything we'd built together. He smiled and said, we're just getting started. Dad. I drove home slowly that night. The desert was dark and very still. I thought about my father and his tile work. About Carol in the August. Heat carrying water to the crew. About 11 employees and a second-hand desk and a crack in the wood that I had never fixed. I thought about what it means to build something that outlasts you. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I had made my final decision. Saturday morning, I called Daniel and told him I needed to push the signing to Monday. I said my attorney had a few final questions he wanted addressed first. Daniel said, of course. No problem. Take all the time you need. His voice was smooth and easy. Monday morning, I arrived at my attorney's office before Daniel did. My corporate attorney was already there, along with 2 other people, a forensic accountant who had spent the weekend reviewing the documents my attorney had secured, and a former federal prosecutor who now worked in corporate litigation. When Daniel walked in and saw the room, he stopped in the doorway. I let the silence sit for a moment. Then I said, sit down. So, the next 3 hours were the hardest of my life. Not because of anything Daniel said in his defense. His explanations were thin, and I had too much documentation for them to hold. They were hard because of the way he looked at me halfway through. There was a moment when the bravado dropped, when the smooth explanations ran out, and I saw something in his face that I recognized. Fear. Yes. But underneath the fear, something that looked almost like relief. Like a man who had been carrying something very heavy for a very long time, and had finally set it down. I did not sign the transfer documents. I did not report Daniel to federal authorities that remained a possibility. 1. My attorney made very clear to everyone in the room, and one that I chose to hold rather than deploy. What I did do was restructure everything. The succession plan was suspended indefinitely. A new board was established, with an independent director holding final approval authority on major transactions. Daniel was moved out of the COO role into a senior advisory position with no signatory authority. Garrett's firm was notified in writing that the company was not available for partnership of any kind. The 3 properties Garrett had been positioned to acquire, the ones Daniel had shared our internal projections on, I moved up the acquisition timeline. We closed on the first one 6 weeks later. I put Carol's name on the building. It's a mixed-use development in a neighborhood that needed it. And when I stood at the groundbreaking with a shovel in my hands, I thought about her driving out to job sites in the August heat, and I felt something close to peace. Sandra filed for divorce 4 months later. I don't know all of what happened between them. and it isn't mine to know. Daniel and I have had 3 conversations since that Monday morning in my attorney's office. They have been short and careful and honest, in the way that things are honest after the performance has fallen away. He told me in the last one that Sandra had pressured him for years about money, about the timeline, about when I was going to step back. He said he had made choices he couldn't undo. I told him that was true. I told him I didn't know yet what our relationship would look like going forward. I told him I still loved him. Because that is also true. And because I am not willing to lie, just because the truth is complicated. Rebecca got a promotion. She didn't ask for it. She doesn't know it's connected to what she did. She probably suspects. Some things you don't need to say out loud. I still sit at that same desk. The crack is still there, running through the grain exactly as it always has. Barely visible, unless you know exactly where to look. My father taught me that a floor is a foundation, that what you walk on every day tells you everything about how you live. I think about that a lot now. I think about what I want the foundation of the next chapter to look like, and who I want standing on it with me. The transfer documents are in a drawer, unsigned, waiting. I'll know when the time is right. And this time, I'll know who I'm trusting before I put pen to paper. There is a certain kind of quiet that comes after a storm, not emptiness, but clarity. The air is different. You can see further. I have lived long enough to know that this quiet doesn't last forever, that new complications will arrive in ways I can't predict. But I also know something now that I did not know before. That anonymous text message arrived on a Thursday afternoon in late October. I know exactly where the cracks are, and I know which ones are worth keeping.